Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight. We're glad to have you joining us. We're going to give it another minute or so that the last few people who are coming in can go ahead and join. And I'm going to try to turn off that sound so we don't hear them every time they join. There we go. I think we're set there. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and pull up our slides. Great. Can everyone see my slides okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. We had been talking internally as a team, and we thought it was really important to put together a town hall at least once a year, just to give our community the opportunity to hear what we're working on, some of the things we're excited about, and to give you the opportunity to ask questions of us. So this evening, presenting will be myself, Mary Ann. Veronica, our Chief Scientific Officer, will be presenting, as well as Shannon Cloud, our Patient Advocacy Director. And we also have a member from CHOP that's going to give an update on the Dravet genome study later in the presentation. Just a few housekeeping rules. We are going to record this webinar and we will share it out with all of our attendees along with the slide deck, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. We'll make sure you have all the information from tonight. We would ask you to make sure to mute your microphone to avoid any interruptions. There are live captions available. There's a little icon at the bottom of your Zoom window that would allow you to toggle those on if you'd like to. And then throughout the presentation, feel free to submit your questions in the chat. We do have a little bit of time set aside at the end for Q&A, but if we are unable to address them during the session, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email. And this is just a quick look at our agenda. I'm not going to dig into this too much, but I'll go ahead and give us an overview to start with for the achievement and progress that DSF has made. So I'm sure many of you here are familiar with our organization, but for those not familiar with our mission statement, it's to aggressively raise funds for Dravet syndrome and related epilepsies, to support and fund research, increase awareness, and to provide support to affected individuals and families. And so when DSF was first founded in 2009, we really had very modest aspirations. It was a group of 4 parents that came together. We wanted to raise a little bit of money in the hopes of awarding a $100,000 research grant. But after that grant was awarded, we had other members of our community step forward and said, what can we do to also help move the needle forward? So we recognized pretty early on that one of the best things that we could do would be to work to be a convener in the space. And what that meant is we wanted to make sure to bring together all of our patient families, but also include clinicians, researchers, and industry members so that everybody was on the same page working towards the same goals. And we found that the best way we could do this was by putting together a strategic plan. So this is our second strategic plan. Each of them have been 5 years. The latest one covers 2023 to 2028. And for both of these strategic plans, we've had 4 pillars, and those are improving access and quality of care, supporting and empowering our constituents, accelerating research, and building and strengthening our organization. And I do have the QR codes here if you'd like to take a closer look at the strategic plan and take a dive in. Underneath each of those pillars, we have a list of objectives, and then each year we do an annual update. And if you want to see our year 1 update, you can see which of those objectives we've been able to cross off of our list so far. These are kind of the high points of the things we've been able to accomplish. And some of these do cross over both the first strategic plan as well as the second. And certainly one of our most exciting and biggest achievements is we've awarded a little over 12.4 million in research funding. And when Veronica speaks later, she'll take a little deeper dive into that. That was through more than 75 research grants. And our strategy with research grants has been to kind of fund these seed grants that have allowed researchers to get the data that they need to apply for larger funding, typically from NIH or other institutions. We've also held 15 research roundtables, with our 16th one taking place this December. And these roundtables bring together professionals in the space. So the top clinicians, the top researchers, and then also industry partners all come together for one night of research and science. Quite frequently, our past awardees will present, but it's really about really about discussing where we're at and what we need to do to continue to move the needle forward. We've been fortunate to help fund 2 expert treatment guidelines. The first one was the North American Consensus Treatment, followed by the International Consensus Treatment. And what this has allowed us to do is really empower families and their neurologists to understand what the first, second, and third line treatment recommendations are for Dravet syndrome, as well as to be aware of the medications that are contraindicated that they should avoid. We've awarded over $279,000 in patient assistance grants. These grants are for families worldwide, and they've been designed to help bridge that gap between items that are covered by commercial insurance versus items that families still need but might not be able to afford otherwise. In this program, families have the opportunity to ask for awards of up to $1,500 annually with a $5,000 lifetime cap. And the items that we see that families are most in need of are things such as seizure monitors, cooling vest, iPads, communication devices, things like that. We're also pleased, I guess, really excited that we've had 6 opportunities to bring together our community for our biennial educational conference, with our 7th conference coming next year in 2026, and a little more on that later. We're very excited to also have 8 active clinical trials for Dravet syndrome, 2 of which are around genetic-based therapies. And what's exciting about this for our community is up until this point, all of these clinical trials have been focused on seizure reduction, which is certainly very important. But these 2 genetic-based therapies offer us the potential of disease modification, meaning it might be able to help with some of the other comorbidities that our patients live with. So we're very excited about that. And then finally, since 2019, we've had 3 FDA-approved medications. And I'm sure for families that are still struggling, this might not seem like it's enough or a lot. But if you were to look across rare diseases, there's about 9,000 rare diseases out there, and less than 5% of those rare diseases have a single treatment that's been indicated for their condition. So it's been exciting for us to see the interest in Dravet syndrome and that we have these new treatment options available. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our financial health as well. So this graph shows where our funding comes from, as well as our income over the years from 2019 to 2024. And I think, the main reason I wanted to show this to you was to help our community understand that this fundraising really comes from our community making the effort to host fundraisers. You can see here that almost 50% of our 50% of our revenue comes in from fundraising, and approximately another 25% from direct contributions. And so really all of this research that we're funding is because of this community effort to help raise funds. We also have roughly 20% that comes in for program service revenue. And what this means is that we do have opportunities from our pharmaceutical partners to get unrestricted educational grants, but because of regulatory rules, there's only certain things that they can fund. So for instance, they can help sponsor an educational conference or a webinar series. So the funds that are coming in from industry are not the funds that are helping to fund research. And then we have roughly 6% in other income that's primarily the interest that we have from our reserve fund. But you can see here in just the last 5 years, from 2019 to 2024, not including 2025 yet, we went from a little over 2 million raised annually to about 4.6 million. So it's been really exciting to see that fundraising growth, and that's really because of our patient families. And this graph tells you a little bit about where our funding goes. Because so many of us who are involved in DSF have a loved one with Dravet syndrome, this is a very personal mission to us. And so we take fiscal responsibility very seriously. You can see here that 78.6% of every dollar that was raised has gone directly towards either patient or research focused programs and services. And when we look more broadly across the nonprofit landscape, that benchmark is 75% or more. So we're very proud to be above that benchmark. We've also been fortunate to raise to award a little over 6.14 million in research grants from 2019 to 2024. And again, that's come about through people's fundraising efforts. You can see here on the graph to the left, for our research program, that is our largest program, which takes up about 52% of our income, followed by patient and family services at a little over 20%. I did want to point out here too as well, you'll see we have fundraising expenses of 5.5%, and that is also extremely low for nonprofit. So again, I think it just shows the drive of our, not just our patient community, but also our staff, and trying to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And then these 3 graphs give kind of a quick overview of our efficiency in our programs, our fundraising, and administrative. And again, at the bottom of each of these, you'll see the standard benchmarks for nonprofits where you want to fall to be showing your fiscal responsibility. And so again, we're really pleased with where we lie in comparison to those benchmark standards. So as far as expenses going directly to programs, we would want it to be at least 75%, and we're at 84.4%. For fundraising, we want to look at how much it costs us to raise $1, and that benchmark is anywhere from 10 to 25 cents, and we're on the lower end at 14 cents. And then how much we spend on day-to-day operations and management. Again, that benchmark would be between 15 and 25%, and we're on the low end at 15.6%. And then this graph also just kind of gives you that quick overview of our cash and investments from 2019. And cash, which is the darker blue color, you'll see year over year, we keep a certain amount of cash reserved for all of our anticipated expenses. And then the rest we put into low risk and investments in order to hopefully get a little bit of additional interest from those. But one of the things that we're just, I think, really pleased with is that you can see to the right what our current liabilities and our current assets are. And the benchmark here is that you would want to be at least above 1%. And we've worked really hard to make sure we have some extra funds kind of saved away. So we're at a 4.41%. And what that has enabled us to do by kind of saving these funds for a rainy day is to fund unique opportunities when they arise. And one of those would be the Dravet Syndrome Genome Study, which you're going to hear a little bit more about from Anna shortly. And that because we had these extra funds available, we were able to fund this $1 million project over 3 years. And this is another quick snapshot of our current financial health, where you can see total revenue and total expenses. On the right, you'll see that those numbers are only through June 2025. So right now the revenue looks like it's a little bit down. That's really in large part because the bulk of our fundraising happens in the fall and in the winter. So we anticipate, like any other year, we're going to come ahead on revenue versus expenses. Again, because we take that fiscal responsibility we have a really strong attitude about making sure that people are aware of where their donations are going to. You can scan this QR code if you like. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're just joining the call, I will be sending out these slides. But you can go to our profile on GuideStar.org, which was recently acquired by Candid.org. And that will show you all of our financial statements year over year, as well as some of what our objectives and metrics are. And I would encourage, for anyone who is interested in learning more about any nonprofit that they're donating to, this is a really good place to start so you can understand how they work with their finances, what they prioritize, and things like that. And then again, just a little bit about those charity ratings. Like I said, Candid and GuideStar have now merged. There's also Charity Navigator, and there's also Great Nonprofits. And we've been really excited that I think we're in year 7 or 8 where we have received the highest mark from all of these organizations showing our fiscal responsibility. And again, we take that very seriously. So every year we make sure that we're going to fall within the criteria that will get us that 4-star rating or that platinum transparency. There's also one other place where you can review all of our annual financials, and that would include our 990 as well as our annual audit. And that's on our website. The link is here, or you can use that QR code to view any of those past materials. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Shannon, our patient advocacy director, who's going to talk about legislative advocacy.
Thank you, Marianne. I just want to echo Marianne and say it's great to see all of you on here and be able to share with you about all of the great progress that DSF has been making. And so I'm going to share a little bit about what not only DSF is doing in the advocacy realm, but as well as what members of our community have been getting engaged in as well. It's been super exciting to see so many people taking action. So whether it's our staff or whether it's the families in the community, like, we want you all to know that we are here to represent you. And we know that as Dravet parents, it's hard to get involved. And so it's really important to us that we be your voice and that we speak up on the things that we know matter to the families in our community. You'll see here that we've gotten a good presence participating in some advocacy events in Washington, D.C., which has been very exciting to have some of our staff, board, family network ambassadors actually take the trip to D.C., learn about the policies that are important to our community, and then be able to meet with congressional staff and tell them about our children and our families and why these things are so important. So we've participated in Rare Disease Week, which is put on by the Every Life Foundation every February. A few of us have been to an event in July with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, And then actually going on right now is Rare Across America, which is also a part of Every Life Foundation. And it is actually a virtual opportunity where you don't have to travel to DC. So I'm excited that some other members of the community are doing that, and really look forward to getting people more plugged in next year in these activities. As I'm sure many of you are aware, we have Dravet Syndrome Awareness Month in June. So it was really incredible to see how many people in our community took such an active role in sharing on social media. We put a lot of content out there, and it was just amazing to see how many things were getting reshared and how much engagement there was, just so that we can educate the world about Dravet syndrome and what's important to our families. We had several families that reached out to their local and state governments to try to get a proclamation in honor of Dravet Syndrome Awareness Day. And that was really exciting to see the pictures of the families spending time. It may have been a county commission or city council meeting, and they got asked to come up and speak and tell them about their child and Dravet syndrome. And then really exciting this year was our first state level proclamation. Some families worked to get done in the state of Pennsylvania. So that was really exciting to see that we're getting that kind of attention. Just in general, like seeing so many people take an active role has been really exciting. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So as I mentioned, as staff members of DSF, we are here to represent you. So not only does that mean from an advocacy perspective at the federal level, the state level, but we also want to make sure that DSF has a seat at the table. So whether it's professional conferences or whatever, we want to make sure that DSF is represented and the members of our community are represented. So, I've gone to some conferences, Marianne and Veronica have gone to even more, and we just want you to know that we are there being your voice and making sure that that our families are being represented. And then I mentioned the advocacy events in DC. And then we also this year, for the first time ever, had a table at the National Epilepsy Walk in Washington, DC. And that was really exciting to be there, along with so many of the other rare disease organizations and so many of our industry partners for such a big event for the epilepsy community. Gloria Rodriguez and I attended a training class a couple months ago, really focused on digging into a better understanding of the whole insurance landscape with a focus on Medicaid, as well as looking at access to genetic treatments. Knowing that this is something that's coming down the line, hopefully for our families, we want to make sure that when these treatments get approved, that we can ensure that our insurance and Medicaid are willing to approve them so we can actually have access. So it's been really critical for us to spend time getting to know some of the organizations that are representing conditions that already have these treatments available and learning what they have done to ensure that their families get access. And then obviously as DSF and a community of families, there's only so much we can do, right? We're all busy and you can't be in all places at all times. So it's really important for us that we partner with a lot of other organizations. So whether that's the Epilepsy Foundation, Epilepsy Alliance America, Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases, American Brain Coalition, there's so many other rare epilepsy organizations as well, and we're all stronger together. We don't all have a presence in DC, but some of these organizations do. And so we really lean on a lot of these other groups, and we get on calls, and there's a lot of collaboration so that we can learn from each other and help each other out with our advocacy efforts. A little bit about what we are advocating for. When we go to DC or encourage our community members to contact their members of Congress, what is it that we are asking for? Honestly, there's no shortage of things and policies that we could be advocating for, but these are some of the ones that we've been spending the most time on. As you know, many children in our community and adults end up having to seek specialist care out of state. They want to travel to a Dravet specialist elsewhere. And that's great if you have private insurance that covers it. But what if your child's only insurance is Medicaid and that doctor you want to see is not a Medicaid provider for your state? So Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act would set up a framework at the federal level, which would make it easier for doctors to enroll in Medicaid from another state so that they can see those patients. The next one is Give Kids a Chance Act. obviously, as a rare disease, we want companies to have a reason to invest in developing treatments for our community. So there is something called the Rare Pediatric Priority Review Voucher that has been around since about 2012. It's a program that has no cost to the taxpayers and has been very successful in getting some of these companies to decide to invest in these diseases that may have a small patient population, but the need is so great. And so, unfortunately, this program expired at the end of last year. It's still partially in place, but it will completely sunset. And that's why it's so critical that this get reauthorized so that this is available to companies that are looking into developing new treatments. The National Plan for Epilepsy. This is similar to what some other conditions have done. I think both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's have a national plan, and really it's just having Congress put together a plan that becomes law that involves input from lots of stakeholders in the epilepsy community and kind of just puts a framework out there to make sure that we are providing the best care for our families with epilepsy, whether it comes to diagnosis, treatment, ultimately finding a cure. So Gloria Rodriguez and I are both serving on work groups that are helping to provide input for this national plan should it end up becoming law. And then the last two on this slide, I mean, as you all know, we're hearing a lot in the news, right, about all of the cuts that are happening at the federal level. There have been up to 90% proposed cuts to NIH funding. Why does that matter to us? I think, you look at how much money DSF has funded for research and say, well, why do we need federal funding? Because DSF is doing it all. We're doing all this fundraising. But as Marianne mentioned, oftentimes a research grant from DSF is just providing the seed money to get a researcher started. And then once that project is complete, then they can go apply for a much larger grant from the NIH or other government funding. And so that's why the idea that there could be cuts this significant are a pretty scary concept for our families. When a lot of the staffing cuts were happening at the federal level a few months ago, the entire staff of the CDC epilepsy program was let go at once. So it's important to note, though, that we do have a voice when it comes to these things. Just because we're hearing about these potential cuts does not mean it's a given. Congress will be coming back in September and they will be talking about the 2026 budget. And so it's really important that we make sure our members of Congress hear from us and understand why these things are so important to our community, so that hopefully they can put some of that money back that was potentially being eliminated. And then I'm sure everyone's familiar with HR 1, which recently passed, dubbed as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. One of the major pieces of that legislation is that it cuts over $1 trillion from Medicaid over the next 10 years. And we have a lot of families, not only that rely on Medicaid for their child's insurance, but also there are so many waiver programs that help our children, especially once they reach adulthood, providing the services that they need in order to ensure that they are able to be cared for at home rather than put in an institution, allowing them to participate in day programs and have caregiving and respite for the family. So these Medicaid cuts are definitely a scary idea because we don't know exactly how they will be implemented at each state level. We did just recently put a blog out on our website on August 1st. So if you're interested in learning more about the potential implications, please go check that out. And then, how can you get involved? We do have a page on our website now that you can go advocate for Dravet.org. We'll take you directly to it. And we've got there's blocks out there that have the different pieces of policy and legislation that we're talking about. And with most of them, you can click on it and use that call to action to send a letter to your legislators. Follow our social media, because we will share information out there about the most urgent things that we would like to engage the community on. Follow some of those other organizations that I mentioned that are listed here. We would love to have more people join us next year in DC or participate in the virtual event. And then it's just really important to make sure that you're reaching out to not only your federal legislators, but also even at the state level, and make sure that they know your story and understand what the needs of your family are and how they can help you. And we're here to help you do that. I know it can be overwhelming, and as Dravet parents, those of you on the call, we're busy. And so please know that DSF is here to help you. We know that not everybody can travel to DC, but we want to help you share with your legislators or be the voice for you when we go to DC. So I'm happy to help. Please reach out if there's anything I can do to help you get engaged.
Oh, Marianne, we can't hear you. That's okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Veronica Hood. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for DSF. As Marianne mentioned, it's really exciting to be here and see a lot of faces and names that I recognize joining the call. And, I'm also excited to talk about some of the advancements that are happening in research and clinical studies. So, as Marianne already told you, DSF has funded an impressive 12.4 million into research projects. And you can see in this graph at the bottom how our research funding has grown year over year, particularly jumping up in recent years where Marianne sort of showed that graph. That's due to the increased fundraising by the community, as well as the growing field of researchers and the increase in the number of promising projects that are out there to fund. We've set out a research roadmap that sort of guides the different areas that are important to fund research into. That came out of some of those research roundtable meetings where we discuss the state of the field with experts. And we can go to the next slide. And so DSF has been able to fund really significant amounts of money into important areas like understanding sudden unexpected death in epilepsy or SUDEP, investing in the development of disease-modifying therapies and drug discovery in other areas as well, understanding the genetics of Dravet syndrome and the clinical spectrum of patients and outcomes. And then also uncovering things like which brain networks are impacted and where are areas that you might need to target therapeutics to. That investment has really resulted in growing the knowledge in the field. The majority of projects that DSF fund result in scientific publication and lots of presentations at science conferences, sort of getting more of that knowledge out there. And then in addition to growing that knowledge base, we're also growing the scientific community. Since 2013, we've funded 18 early career scientists, and several of those scientists have now gone on from training in someone else's lab to starting their own lab where they're focused on Dravet syndrome research, and they're actually now training young scientists themselves to focus on Dravet syndrome. So Marianne, you can go forward. As has already been pointed out by Marianne, a lot of our projects are sort of focused on funding pilot projects. And so a lot of that allows researchers to begin investigations into really promising areas, gather enough data that they can go seek larger funding sources like from the NIH. And so this graph here shows with the blue bars going across year over year how many millions of dollars the NIH has funded into Dravet syndrome research. And so you can see how things have really grown exponentially over the years. If you add all of those columns up, it's over $150 million that the NIH has funded to Dravet related projects. And DSF funded researchers go on to get a large chunk of those projects year over year. And so it's really important both DSF and federal funding work together to really push things forward. And one metric of that is what I've also shown here, the number of scientific publications each year in the line that goes across that graph. And so you can see how important all these things are to just growing the overall field of research. Go to the next slide. And so, I'm talking a lot about the research we funded, and we're so proud of it, and it is a huge part of what DSF does. But I think the other really important pillar and the other thing that has progressed research significantly for Dravet syndrome is the way that DSF stands as a convener, bringing all of the important stakeholders together in one place to talk about things and to talk to each other. So certainly the way that DSF has convened and supported the patient community, but the way that we've also brought professionals, scientists, healthcare providers, pharma and biotech, and government regulators all into the same room to discuss things and included the patient family voice in those conversations as well. And I think both investing in research and convening all of those important people has really fed into the development of knowledge, of experts in Dravet syndrome, of sharing of ideas, of development of tools for research, and all of that has fed into the improved outcomes that we're seeing. Certainly, there's still so much to accomplish, but there have been really significant improvements. There's better access to genetic testing and faster diagnoses with increased awareness. There's a growing pool of healthcare providers that can actually provide expert care to families living with Dravet syndrome. And there are new therapies in development. And as Marianne mentioned, there's clinical guidelines that can help even families who can't make it to a level 4 epilepsy center still receive good quality care because that information is being shared. So if you want to go to the next slide. And so here's actually an example from one of those treatment consensuses that came out, sort of showing how experts were able to break down medication choices. And this most recent consensus statement included those 3 anti-seizure medications that have been approved for Dravet syndrome, so Diacomet, Epidiolex, and Fintepla. And as Marianne said, that's just such a significant accomplishment to have 3 FDA approved medications for a rare disease. And now having these guidelines that allow clinicians and families to work together on choosing top line treatments, avoiding treatments that shouldn't be used. I think it's really improving outcomes for families, but there's still a lot to be done. And I think what's really encouraging to me is that a lot is happening in the treatment space. And so if you want to go to the next slide. I wanted to talk about all those exciting things that are happening. And so at least 8 companies have an active pipeline product that they're developing for Dravet syndrome. And these are sort of kind of all across the stages of development. So several of them at the bottom of this pipeline image are sort of still in the preclinical stages where they're testing it in an animal model like a mouse to see if it could be effective. But there are others that have moved into phase 1 studies. So just looking at, is this safe to use in a human before moving on to studies where they can actually test if this treatment might improve outcomes for patients with Dravet syndrome. And so the top 3 treatments in this pipeline all have active clinical studies that are enrolling. And so I delve a little bit deeper into them on the next slide. So we have these 3 studies that are right now actively enrolling or about to begin enrolling. They all have sites in the United States. So Deep Sea is looking at a study drug called bexicaserin. It's a serotonin receptor superagonist, and they're enrolling patients aged 2 to 65 years with Dravet syndrome. They also have a sister arm of the study that's looking at all patients with different developmental and epileptic encephalopathies as well. So they're hoping this could be an anti-seizure medication that might work broadly across different epilepsy syndromes. You can find more about the Deep Sea study either by going to dravetclinicaltrials.org, which will take you to the DSF website, and you'll be able to see all of the pipeline I just showed you, as well as these actively enrolling studies. But I've also, for convenience on this slide, if there's a study you really specifically want to know more about, I've included the study website as well as the clinicaltrials.gov listing. The next study, Argus, is for a study drug, clemizole. This also is for patients aged 2 and up, so all the way up into adults. And this is another serotonin receptor agonist, and there are US and international sites for this study as well. The Emerald study is a little bit of a newer study that I don't think I've really been able to talk to the community about yet until today, because they've just started putting information out. But this will also be, age 2 to 65. So I think that's what's really exciting about all 3 of these studies. This is including, adults with Dravet as well. And this is for the study drug relutrigine. It's a persistent sodium channel inhibitor. Usually you think a sodium channel drug is not something you want to use in Dravet syndrome. This sodium channel inhibitor works a little differently. It's targeting a very specific type of sodium channel and a very specific type of activity. And so from preclinical work, they think it could actually be effective for Dravet syndrome as well as some other epilepsy syndromes. And so they're beginning this study both in the US and internationally. And what's a little bit unique about this study is there's the opportunity for remote participation. And so I think that offers a real advantage for a lot of families where traveling to a study site might not be feasible. So again, you can find more information about these at our website or those call outs. And then the next thing, moving on from sort of those more traditional small molecule medicines to something I think we're all so excited about, which is therapies that treat Dravet syndrome at the cause. And so we know that the primary cause of Dravet syndrome is a reduction in the number of healthy sodium channels that are caused by a mutation in one copy of the SCN1A gene. And so genetic-based therapies seek to restore healthy levels of that sodium channel that the SCN1A gene codes for. And because they treat it at the source, that's why it's believed they hold the potential to not just treat seizures, but to treat the entire syndrome. And two companies so far have entered human clinical trials, as Marianne mentioned, and they're actually both Encoded Therapeutics has developed a one-time gene therapy delivered by AAV, and these initial studies have been ongoing for a little over a year without any significant safety concerns reported so far, and they continue to enroll. On the next slide, I have just broken out a little bit of information about each of those studies. So the Emperor study is the phase 3 study from Stoke Therapeutics for zorevunersen, the ASO. And then Endeavor is the arm of the study from Encoded Therapeutics for their AAV therapy, ETX-101. They have 3 US-based sites for the Endeavor study, and they have 2 sister studies, one in Australia and one in the UK. These studies are a little more limited in age. So for the Emperor study, it goes from age 2 years to below age 18. And then for the Endeavor study, it's even more limited from 6 months to 36 months. Both these companies are still in early stages of investigating these therapies, and they've both indicated their hope is to bring this to as many patients as can benefit. And so we hope that if these initial phases are successful, that we might see them expanding out and looking at other age ranges as well. If you want to go to the last slide. So I just wanted to end with encouraging all of you to consider getting involved in research efforts, whether you find an interventional clinical trial like some of the ones that I've just showed, or you might consider participating in some of these other studies that are ongoing. I've listed a few examples here that are all on this clinicaltrials.org website. But some of them you can participate remotely and just involve sending in a sample or data. One just involves a cell phone video submission, or even just taking surveys that you may see DSF send out is a huge way to lend your experience in ways that can help the entire community both now and in the future. And so I'm actually now going to pass this off to one such opportunity, which is the Dravet Genome Study. We have our researchers from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia here. We have, I believe, Anna Prentice is going to be talking to you about this DSF-funded study that so many in our community have already jumped on board to help support. So thank you, Anna.
Veronica. So yeah, it will be going over a few aspects of our project so far. So I'll start with an overview, talk a little bit about what the project is, what we're looking to discover, and then I'll talk a little bit about our recruitment, some preliminary analysis that we've done, and also how you can participate if you'd be interested. So just as a brief overview, the goal of this study is really to understand the differences among people with variants in SCN1A, so with Dravet syndrome, but also with other SCN1A related disorders. We know that people who have SCN1A related disorders, even with exactly the same genetic change, can look very different from each other, but we don't fully understand why that is. And in order to figure that out, really what we want to do is two things. First, we want to better describe the clinical features of SCN1A related disorders in many individuals in high detail and across the lifespan. So we call that longitudinal data, looking at how people's features change over time rather than just treating them as if they were one static time point. And then we also want to learn about how an individual's genetic background might influence those symptoms, their presence or absence, and also how they change over time, their trajectory. Our approach to all of these objectives is sort of in two parts. So the first part is what we would call longitudinal phenotypic reconstruction. So this is something our group has done for several different genetic conditions. And it essentially involves annotating each person with different terms or symptoms that they might have. And we annotate each of those terms for different ages or stages of life. So for example, an individual might have seizures, status epilepticus, developmental delays, and autism, but they might have some of those at different points in their life. So at each month of age, we would annotate yes or no, do they have that symptom or do they not have it at that point? And we do this for every symptom somebody might have throughout their life, or at least the portions of their life that we have their medical records for. And the second part of the study is more of the bench science or the genomic and molecular analysis. So that involves whole genome sequencing for all participants, so getting in a complete sequence of all of their DNA. And it also involves some experiments or functional studies of the SCN1A encoded protein in a cell line using things like publicly available stem cell lines. And putting these things together, we hope to be able to match the phenotype or the symptoms that somebody has to their genetic information. So combining those things together into a data set that can help us predict the severity of SCN1A related disorders using somebody's genetics. The recruitment goal for this project was 500 individuals with SCN1A related disorders. Currently, we have 463 enrolled in our project, so we're really coming close to that goal. And we have 380 samples, and the samples are only catching up to the enrollment every week, which is great. We also had a goal for this project to enroll 120 participants from underrepresented groups, and we've actually already exceeded that goal, even though we haven't finished our recruitment yet. So that was something that we can be proud to share with you guys today. So to share some of the kind of preliminary data analysis, so far we have compiled detailed clinical information on 100 individuals with SCN1A related disorders. So that includes all the things I talked about previously: seizure types, seizure frequency, developmental and behavioral symptoms, but also other symptoms they might have. In addition to that, we also record EEG results that they've had and any anti-seizure therapies that they've had throughout their lifetime. And we also have the data for genome sequencing for 150 individuals out of 500 at this time. Today, I'll focus a little bit more on the clinical side of things, because that's something that we have to get into place before we can compare it to the genetic information. So one thing that we can do when we have this kind of standardized information about all these people is that we can look in sort of a more computational way at how different symptoms look over time. So these plots, each color represents a different seizure type, as you can see from the labels, and the line height is the proportion of people who have that seizure type at a certain age. So as you move to the right, age increases, and the higher values represent more individuals. So some takeaways that we can learn from this data is that bilateral tonic-clonic seizures, which are also called generalized tonic-clonic or grand mal seizures, are really the most common seizure type that we see both across individuals and across time. They start happening early in life, and they continue to be common throughout the first 8 years of life. Kind of differently from that, seizure types like febrile seizures, hemiclonic seizures, and status epilepticus tend to be more common early in life, so in the first 2 years of life, but then decrease with time. And then the last pattern that we tend to see is non-motor seizures, myoclonic seizures, atonic seizures, and focal impaired awareness seizures are seizure types that don't happen as much in early life, but then tend to increase over time and stay common as people age. Another thing that we can look at is beyond seizures, what other symptoms or features do we see in this cohort? And we can actually split it up by the different diagnoses that people had. So this is all patients with a clinical diagnosis of Dravet syndrome. And we can look at what features are very common in those individuals. So all of them have seizures, as we'd expect. Almost all of them have had at least one prolonged seizure in their life and at least one grand mal seizure in their life. Over 80% have developmental differences and EEG differences that would be expected because they have epilepsy. But there are also some features that are less common, such as very severe global developmental delays and febrile seizures that are not prolonged. So we see on this chart that a long sort of triangle represents a high proportion of people that have a certain symptom, and a short triangle would represent that not many people have that symptom. And if we go to the next slide, we can compare these to the different clinical diagnoses that we see. So people with SCN1A related disorders may have Dravet syndrome most commonly, but they can also have clinical diagnoses of atypical Dravet syndrome, genetic epilepsy with febrile seizures plus or GEFS plus. And some individuals also have a diagnosis of a developmental and epileptic encephalopathy, or DEE, which is associated with different types of changes or variants in the SCN1A gene. And some things that we've learned by looking at the symptoms that are most common in these individuals are that, first of all, the people who are diagnosed with atypical Dravet syndrome really look a lot like people who are diagnosed with Dravet syndrome. So we didn't find much distinction between those two groups, except for that people with atypical Dravet syndrome tend to have a little bit more frequency of tonic seizures. Alternatively, people diagnosed with GEFS plus, we can see that a lot of these triangles are a lot shorter, which suggests to us that there might be a milder disease course or that they have fewer of these symptoms. Two symptoms that they tend to have more frequently than people with Dravet syndrome are simple febrile seizures, which means a febrile seizure that's usually short and not too complicated. And also depression and anxiety are more common in people with GEFS plus. And then finally, we can look at the DEE that's associated with different types of variants in SCN1A called gain-of-function variants. And we see that these patients or individuals tend to have a little bit of a more severe or distinct disease course. They tend to have lots of tonic seizures. They tend to have failure to thrive as a baby. They have movement disorders, one of which is called dystonia. And they can also have more severe developmental delays. So these data can really help us pick apart these different clinical diagnoses and what they actually look like in practice. One other aspect that we can look at is how things evolve over time. So we can look at different features of SCN1A related disorders and how they onset. So these three plots are broken up into different categories of symptoms. So the first one is behavioral differences on the left, the second in the middle are developmental delays, and the last one on the right are motor coordination or gait and walking differences. So we see that many of these symptoms tend to onset around the same time, around the 1 to 2 year mark. And most individuals are affected by at least one of these symptoms. So we can see that all of these top lines marked any, they all go above 60, which would be 60% of people. So we know that most people with SCN1A related disorders have some kind of behavioral differences. Most people have developmental differences, and most people have some difficulties with gait and coordination. We can also see specific parts of those differences. For example, in the middle, we can see that delayed speech and language development is really underlying a lot of the developmental differences, as opposed to motor differences, which are less common overall. On the right side, we can also see that features like hypotonia or decreased muscle tone tend to onset much earlier in life. It's the little orange line that sort of tracks right on the bottom left with the any line. And we can see that other features onset a little bit later, like coordination differences or imbalance. So these are just some of the different ways that we can look at the clinical data that we've collected. And I think importantly, all of these metrics help us to assess how severely or how somebody is affected by their SCN1A related disorder. And understanding disease severity and understanding different features that evolve over time will help us match this data to the genomic data to be able to understand how these phenotypic or symptom differences are affected by somebody's genetics. And then I'll just end by saying, first of all, thank you to everybody on this call, as well as the entire Dravet community, for all of your support in both funding this project and so enthusiastically participating. We truly could not have done any of this without you. And then I'll also say that if you or a loved one has an SCN1A related disorder and would like to participate, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Our study email is scn1a@chop.edu. And your participation will hopefully be pretty easy and just involve a short consent process that takes place over the phone, as well as DNA collection, which is just done with a cheek swab, and we can ship you a kit by mail and you can mail it back in. So no need to kind of go into your provider or anything like that. So thank you, everyone.
We do have a few minutes for Q&A. Shannon, do we have anything in the chat?
There are a few questions. So first, Aaron just asked, great question, Aaron. Will the CHOP study team be at the last 2 days of Dravet workshops? And the answer is yes. We've been fortunate to have Anna and other members of her team that have come to the first 3, and so it's allowed them to connect with some families in person. So if you're going to be joining us either next weekend in Gurnee or in Hershey, they will be there and would love to help you participate. Veronica, do you want to take the ketogenic diet question?
Yeah, so we had the question from Jen of what would it take for the ketogenic diet to be reevaluated and placed higher as a first or second line of treatment. So talking about that expert treatment consensus. So, there are some limitations to the treatment consensus. I mean, first of all, most of us know that no 2 patients with Dravet syndrome are alike, and that extends out into medication responses. So the expert treatment consensus is really just based on just that, on expert neurologists who've seen, significant numbers of patients with Dravet syndrome and sort of their experience of what has worked best in their professional opinion. And part of the things they might be taking into account too, when you think about something like a traditional medication or a ketogenic diet, is not only efficacy, but adherence or ability for families to maintain a child on the ketogenic diet. But the bigger asterisk sort of with the treatment consensus is just a lot of this is just based on expert opinion. And so we don't have evidence for each of these treatments. For the treatments like Epidiolex and stiripentol and fenfluramine, we do have some evidence because they went through real-time placebo-controlled clinical studies. And so these are studies that took several years and lots of money to run and required patients to spend time on either a treatment pill or on a placebo pill. And so, we do have some evidence of how effective those therapies are, but for a lot of the other therapies in the treatment consensus, asking patients to do a placebo-controlled ketogenic diet study would be really burdensome and really costly, and probably wouldn't necessarily move the ketogenic diet up significantly in the treatment paradigm. I think what the hope is that with the first, second, and third treatments, which, keto does, I think, land in the third line, if I'm correct. I think the idea is that most patients are going to go through, a combination of several of those meds, and the hope is that clinicians are talking about all of those options at the same time with families sort of off the bat. It's certainly what we advocate for. But it's just an imperfect process, I guess. And so there's not an easy way just to move it up the treatment paradigm without asking our community to go through some really burdensome trials. And so hopefully families are still getting the information that ketogenic diet can be a great option that can be really effective without significant side effects. That's what we try to get out there. But I understand the frustration if it's working really well for you, wanting to see it higher up. I hope that explains that a little bit better.
Great. Thank you for both of those. And then we just had a few calls to action for our community. As promised earlier, I just wanted to mention the date for our 2026 conference. So that'll be June 25th to the 27th, and we'll be at the Renaissance Orlando at SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. If you have not had the opportunity to attend a conference, I would really encourage you to try to make this your first one. It is such a rare opportunity to hear from leading experts in the field, meet researchers, meet clinicians, and then just really connect with families who understand the medical journey you're on. I've never had anyone disappointed to join, so I hope this might be an option for all of our families joining us today. And then also a couple more call to actions. Fundraising is what funds us at DSF. And so we've been very fortunate over the last few years to be able to bring on some additional staff to help us expand out our fundraising efforts. We have both Misty and Meredith who are available. And I say this recognizing that for all of us, often it takes all that you can do in one day just to get through the day caring for your child. But if you have the opportunity and want to host an event, whether it's from a lemonade stand to a gala, Misty and Meredith are there for you. They've developed some really nice programs, such as our Steps Towards a Cure Walk series that Misty runs. We have virtual events. There's a lot of different ways that you can fundraise. And it's also a wonderful opportunity to share about what Dravet syndrome is, share your child's story, because it's really kind of those outside of our community that are helping to fund these better treatments and moving us forward with research. So you can either email them at fundraising@dravetfoundation.org. Obviously, there's also a QR code here that will take you to our host and event page that will give you some ideas. We also have Cheyenne on our staff who can help you with unique ways to give. And so, for instance, if you're considering making a donor-advised fund gift or a QCD gift, or you're interested in adding DSF to your will, Cheyenne can help you with that. And again, this QR code will take you to all of those different options so you can explore them a bit more. And then if you're not already familiar with our programs, I would really encourage you to scan this QR code and really take a dive in and see what we offer, because there might also be some volunteer opportunities in there for you as well. Even though we do have a larger staff now, really the more people we have volunteering and doing things is just what really propels this whole organization forward. And you may not have had the opportunity to talk to those from other rare disease organizations, but DSF really is kind of held to a gold standard in the rare epilepsy space because we have had so many things happen in such a short period of time. And that really is because of our community. There is no way that even our staff of 11 could make that all happen. And so a big thank you to everyone who's already involved in our programs. Like Veronica had mentioned earlier, being in a clinical trial or filling out surveys or sharing the patient voice. These are all things that are just so important to help move everything forward. And then finally, we were really excited. We just recently added a contact us form. We've certainly always been available by email at info@Dravet Foundation. But on this form, it's your opportunity to come to us and ask questions, or if you have a suggestion for a new program or a new resource, we want to hear those things from you, because it's really, again, we want to work on the things that are most important to our patient community. And so with that, I'd just like to thank you for joining us today. As promised, we will be sure to send out the slide deck as well as the link to the recording when they're available, most likely tomorrow. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. If you don't have our email address at info@email, we'll at least get your email to us, and then Karen will make sure it gets to the correct person. So thank you again.